During the presidency of Nixon, there were many wide conflicts. On February 18, 1970, members of the Chicago Seven were crossing state lines to incite riots during the 1968 Democratic Presidential Convention in Chicago and were sentenced and convicted. In the year 1970, the census calculated over 200 million people living in the United States. Later on April 22nd, the first Earth Day celebration was held. Millions of Americans came to support the cause. This demonstration included many things benefiting school children. On May 4th, 1970, 4 students from Kent State University in Ohio were shot and killed by National Guardsmen during a protest against the Vietnam War spread into Cambodia. Nixon orders Kissinger to come up with a plan for bombing Cambodia.
On January 2, 1971, a ban on the television advertisement of cigarettes goes into effect in the United States. On February 8th, a 44-day raid by the South Vietnamese soldiers had begun with the aid of the United States air and artillery. On March 10th, the Senate approved a constitutional amendment lowering the voting age from 21 to 18. It was ratified by the states on June 30th and received certification by President Richard M. Nixon on July 5th. On June 30th, the United States Supreme Court allows the right of the New York Times and the Washington Post to publish classified information under the freedom of speech. On March 30th, 1972, the largest attacks by North Vietnamese troops across the demilitarized zone in 4 years happened. Bombing raids began again by the United States forces against China on April 15th, ending a 4-year succession of raiding. May 22nd, President Richard Nixon makes the first trip to Moscow. July 8th, the White House would announce the sale of American wheat to the Soviet Union. June 17th, the Watergate crisis begins. 4 men are arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate office building in Washington. On November 17th, in one of the most unequal races in American presidential election history, President Richard M. Nixon beats his Democratic opponent, George S. McGovern, winning 250 Electoral College votes to McGovern's 17 and taking over 60% of the popular vote. This election, however, would be the beginning of the end for the presidency of Richard M. Nixon. January 22nd, the United States Supreme Court rules in Roe v. Wade that a woman cannot be prevented by a state in having an abortion during the first 6 months of pregnancy. January 27th, 4-part Vietnamese peace pacts were signed in Paris, France. The announcement of the military draft ending also occurred on that date. The last U.S. military troops would leave the war zone on March 29th.
On January 30th, 1973, 2 defendants in the Watergate break-in trial are convicted. The remaining 5 defendants had pleaded guilty to the crime 2 weeks earlier. During Senate hearings on June 25th, Dean would admit that the administration had conspired to cover up facts about the case, leading to the refusal of the president to release tapes concerning Watergate. October 7th, Vice President Spiro T. Agnew resigns amid charges of tax evasion and is replaced by the appointment of Gerald R. Ford on October 12th. October 19th, oil imports from Arab oil-producing nations are banned to the United States after the start of the Arab-Israeli War. This created the 1973 energy crisis. On May 7, 1974, impeachment hearings began by the House Judiciary Committee against President Richard Nixon. On July 24th, the United States Supreme Court rules that President Nixon must turn over the 64 tapes of White House conversations concerning the Watergate break-in. July 27th, the first of 3 articles of impeachment against President Richard M. Nixon is recommended in a 27-11 vote of the House Judiciary Committee, charging that Nixon had been part of a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice in the Watergate affair. August 9th, President Richard Nixon resigns the office of the presidency. Avoiding the impeachment process and admitting his role in the Watergate affair, Vice President Gerald R. Ford pardoned Nixon for his role and replaced him. Nixon was the first president to ever resign from the office.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office, where so many decisions have been made that shape the history of this nation. Each time I have done so to discuss with you some matter that I believe affected the national interest. In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. As long as there was such a base, I felt strongly that it was necessary to see the constitutional process through to its conclusion, that to do otherwise would be unfaithful to the spirit of that deliberately difficult process. But the interests of the nation must always come before any personal considerations. From the discussions I have had with congressional and other leaders, I have concluded that because of the Watergate matter, I might not have the support of the Congress that I would consider necessary to back the very difficult decisions and carry out the duties of this office in the way the interests of the nation will require. I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first.
On March 30th, 1975, Democratic Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter opens his campaign headquarters for the 1976 presidential race. On the 29th to the 30th, Communist forces complete their takeover of South Vietnam. On January 21st, 1977, President Jimmy Carter pardons 10,000 Vietnam War drafts. September 21st, 15 nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, signed a nuclear proliferation pact, slowing the spread of nuclear weapons around the world.
On September 17, 1978, the Camp David peace agreement between Israel and Egypt is made. President Jimmy Carter witnessed the signing of the agreement between Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat at the White House. On October 6, 1979, the Federal Reserve System changes its monetary policy goals from interest rate based to a money supply target orientation.